name is Dr. Rafiu Oladipo.
My name is Baba Jalal Repega.
I'm Reverend Juliet Benite.
I'm Godio Didi.
My name is Professor Oladokun Sulaiman Olarawaju.
Souq News is on the ground, loading.
Very enlightening, very educative, and entertaining.
Thank you to Souq News.
So I'm happy that Souq TV has come into existence.
I'm happy to be here in the Souq News.
I want to encourage you to subscribe to the channel and keep watching news that makes sense.
As Browning said, one's extension of one's reach should not exceed one's grasp, or what is heaven for? And I think Souq News is doing that.
Africa needs a voice of truth, and Souq News has become one of them. And get ready, get ready, get ready.
And keep watching.
Keep watching Souq News.
Keep watching Souq News. It's a place to be.
Keep watching.
Yes, hello and welcome to Souq Pulse. Here we will x-ray and look at the consequences of the activities and actions of development agencies, government policies. What do they have to do with the growth of economies of individual businesses? And also look at the success of industries and new technologies happening around both Africa and outside Africa. Welcome to Souq Pulse. My name is John Rogers Chooks, and I'm not here alone. I'm joined by the wise ones, the major analyst of Souq News. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me as I welcome our very own Dr. Idahosa. You're welcome, sir.
Just good afternoon. Pleasure to be here once again.
Thank you. You're still looking at me. I'm calling you the wise one. I can't stop it. Yes, also with him is also a guest of ours. Please join me and I welcome another guest analyst and also an in-house. Mr. Sam, you're welcome. Good afternoon, sir.
A pleasure to be here.
Yes. I also have my co-anchor in the house, Grace Komolafe. Grace, how are you doing?
Very well. Thank you for having me. Of course, I know we'll be doing this all together. Yes, we will be looking at economic dynamics in Africa, looking at the debt ratio of African countries, policies, and of course, how it affects businesses.
You're welcome, Chris. Yes, you're stuck with me on this particular show. So for every one of you that are wondering, this is a new program on Souq News and we'll be live on this belt every day, Monday to Friday by 4 p.m. Today on Souq Pulse, we will be looking at a development agency, IMF. And our topic for today, we're looking at IMF and the debt burden. The topic for today is, we are stemming from the last new Global Financing Pact Summit that held in France. That was a good gathering of presidents across Africa, and a lot of things were taken out from that particular summit. So we'll be looking at that particular summit and be taking things and talk about it. How does it affect Africa? How has Africa grown after that summit? And the things that were spoken at that particular place, in particular as it concerns IMF. Now, I'm looking at that particular presentation by the president of Kenya, President William Ruto. There were three major things he asked for. He asked how to get emergency liquidity. Two, he asked for how to deal with debt that is saddling developing countries and how to get additional funding, even with the debt. Now he focused majorly on IMF. And I'm going to be very, very direct on this. He was looking at the debt burden on Africa. And he took example with his own country. Kenya is paying $5 billion on debt servicing alone. Now I'm quoting him directly. Now he's asking, is it possible for that international community focusing on IMF to give Kenya and also African countries a relief for a period? I won't quote the particular number of years he was asking for. So now, we on our own show today, we are looking at that debt burden and as it concerns IMF. Now he quote, remember is a quote, and he reiterated that most African countries are in debt because some of these international organizations, knowingly or unknowingly, do not want this debt to be fully paid. That is in quote. So we are talking about IMF and African debt burden. Before we get in, let's also remember that in 2022, a large chunk of Nigerian GDP, internally generated revenue, was used in servicing debt. And for IMF, you can't borrow except some policy change is being made. Before we get into that, what do you have to say? Debt burden and IMF, how do they correlate?
Well, for me, every agency that is put in place, they have a philosophy around it. And if you look at the circumstances that actually surrounded the establishment of the Bretton Woods institution in 1944 after the Second World War, it shows to you what the program was all about. It was not in building Africa, it was about building Europe and the nations that participated in the war. So when you have a banking system put in place and you are going to go to a bank to go and borrow money, you have to be very clear in your heart that you're borrowing money to fund things that, of course, will be able to pay back. I see Ruto's argument as mere complaints, and which is the excuse that many African leaders keep having in terms of developing fundamentals and framework to actually build a society that is viable. There's nothing that says that if Ruto say, for example, in the next 5 years, I'm not going to pay any debt service to IMF. The only thing is that they will not borrow you more money.
Okay.
And then you can grow what you have within and then decide maybe after 5 years or 6 year moratorium you have given to yourself and go and pay the debt. The maximum is that they will not allow you to come to the conferences. They will not allow you to participate in international relations. You can actually isolate yourself if you're really desirous and serious about things that you want to do.
Is isolating safe?
Oh, yes, it's safe. China did at a certain point in their history.
China, Asia.
For 30 years, they were off the radar. The borders closed, both air, land, and sea closed to all nations in the world, and they focus on themselves. And I think this is the step that African leaders need to take. We don't need to be excusing our failures. The problem is not with the IMF. The problem is with African leaders.
He that borrows.
Who really do not know what they want to borrow for. And then go ahead and sign deals and take money that they don't need. And when the money comes, it ends up in private pocket.
That's part one of it.
That is what it is. So most of the time, all these issues we talk about, African debt, you go and look at it. Look at the volume of the money that Africa has taken and then put them vis-a-vis the infrastructure you have on the ground. You see, it's almost zero. You see, because at every point, we are negotiating from the point of weakness. And every time you negotiate from the point of weakness, you're not going to get value for whatever thing that you are asking. And I think this is where African leaders need to wake up, to sit up. It's not enough to just go to IMF and say we want more money or want debt relief. Don't forget, Nigeria, during the Obasanjo regime, IMF gave us a debt relief.
Yes.
They wrote off almost all the debt. But we have climbed back to the same path. Because you see, you cannot be doing same thing and you're expecting a different outcome.
Okay,
Albert Einstein says that is the definition of insanity.
Let's get to hear from Mr. Sam. What is your take? IMF and our debt burden.
If you look at the political economy of Africa, the relationship which Dr. underscored earlier, the Bretton Woods institutions that emerged from the end of the Second World War were meant for reconstruction purposes after the war. And essentially they were in Europe. But beyond that, IMF, even those who have worked inside of IMF, criticize that institution that is not useful, particularly for the global south or the developing country. The other question, which Doctor spoke to earlier, is about governance issue. Some of this money that they take from IMF, to what extent are this money used for development purpose? So those are the critical narration that we must do. Some of this money, when they come into Africa, these same leaders that are complaining don't use those money for the purpose for which they are meant for. So to that extent, IMF and African leadership need to rework some of the things they do, and we can avoid this loan practically if the leadership is right. It comes to a point where we need to reform those institutions, and Africans can actually excuse themselves from some of those institutions, and nothing will happen.
All right, so we are aware that debt to GDP is actually a key indicator to a nation's fiscal health. So I want to outline about top 1 to 10 highest countries, now African countries, you know, that in 2022 we've got data on the debt to GDP ratio. So I take Cape Verde at 127%, Mozambique 101%, Republic of the Congo 99.57%, Sierra Leone 98.8%, Ghana 88.8%, Egypt 87.2%, Gambia 80.8%, Senegal 75%, and Morocco 71.6%. And it also mentioned earlier that Nigeria at some point got a relief, right? So would you say that it's a deliberate thing because, you know, I mean, even when you get it sorted, you can always go back to it and the money will be given to you. Are you saying it's a deliberate thing for most of these African countries?
Most of us at the social sciences, we've gone beyond using GDP to measure development and growth, because it's not a right indicator to use to tell whether a country is doing well or not doing well. Now, you just have read out African figure. You would have gone to the US that are having over 125% of debt to GDP.
Of course, we have that data as well.
As it were. But you see, Nigerian debt to GDP is about 23% or 24% within that threshold. But it does not talk about or reflect on whether there are food on the table of the common man on the street. So the issue is not debt to GDP ratio. You see, the real issue in Africa, and that is what we need to speak to, they are the issues of governance. You see, it's not just about IMF. You see, on the one hand, recently, we also had narratives where, of course, even the Bretton Woods institutions were accusing Africa to be wary of China debt. Okay. Because China is also trapping us with debt. You see,
is it more of a competition now?
You see, this is the issue. So, because debt is a weapon.
Now you're talking.
They call it trapionism. Now, what this means is that, like it is written in the Bible, as the rich has power over the poor, so is a borrower, a slave to the lender. Now, once you understand this circumstance, you will be able to understand the role that debt is playing in global or geopolitics of the globe. So here, I give you money, I tell you what to do with it. You see, most of this money that actually come to Africa, if you were to actually do analysis of aid, they really don't come in as cash. Many of them end up as consultancy fee and services to the same Bretton Woods institutions. So it's not as if they bring this money to your country to come and develop you. So they are not bringing equipment most of the time. So they are going to tell you how you're going to spend the money. They choose your consultants, and most of these consultants are from the country of the lender, and they bring this money to you. Right. But the issue here is the fact that Africans keep asking for money even when they don't need it.
Okay.
That's a problem. So most African countries need money, and these people, you just know this microfinance. You know, as they move around the markets area.
Lot of them.
Yes, of course, and tell you, come and borrow money. It is 2%, 3%.
Of course.
And then, of course, market people rush the money because they think it's free money. And after 1 month or 2 months, then the microfinance come back and they are putting pressure. They are running. They are changing their SIM and telephone. This is what is happening.
Sir, okay. You just brought up a point now. Then also the first point. I'll go there and I'll come to what you just said now. Now, the IMF is poised as a lender with open heart. It's poised as a lender with clean heart. Now, the IMF will give you money. In their rules, they say there are certain policies that you must follow before we give you money, which you write, they approve. Now, my question is this. When they give this same money, why don't they enforce that those policies are changed? Why don't they enforce that those particular policies that say, okay, this is why we are giving you the money, is followed through? If truly they think that you can or will pay that money back.
Yeah, but let me tell you something, and that's very simple. Even the so-called policies option that are suggested for most African countries are not suitable for our environment. And this is where we keep talking about homegrown solution to our problem. The problem of Europe and the problem of Africa are not the same. So you can't bring a solution from Europe and impose it on Africa and you're thinking it's going to work. There are cultural dimensions to our issues. And of course, IMF don't pay attention to this. You see, because in social science, they call them, there are two schools, basic school in terms of the analysis of development issues. You have the modernization school, which says, okay, all African people need to do is to behave like European, throw away your culture, act like Europe, and then you will be developed. And we are also saying that from here, the dependency school, that look, what you're doing and tying us to your April string is slowing us down. So these are the issues. Even if you are going to enforce it, what are you going to enforce? Somebody asked you and said, okay, you go and do structure to feed poor people. But me and you will know that if you borrow money to eat, and you don't have a corresponding source of generating that money to pay back, that it will become a burden on your neck. Definitely. So this is what the issues are. So the options they are suggesting to you is just like every commercial bank. So who gives you money, and they are giving you money, and the target is actually not the money they are giving to you. The target is the collateral.
Long-term interest.
No, it's the collateral.
To my point.
The collateral is what the issue is. So if, what is the collateral here? Is your natural resource.
Okay.
Which you must pay.
Okay, so I want to come to, you mentioned China earlier, and I will bring in this to Mr. Sam. You know, Ghana actually borrowed an amount from, sustainable amount from China, and in return, they used their resources, natural resources, as collateral. Oil, bauxite, cocoa, and all of that, right? So looking at this, would you say that it's a way to subdue African countries? Because I see a lot of this happening, you know, have seen a lot of African countries owing, and again, you see them say developing countries. For me, I ask, who define developing and developed countries, you know? So my question is, Ghana owing $1.9 billion, you know, to China as a debt, and in fact, they are still seeking for more from IMF. So what do you think? Having to use mineral resources like cocoa, bauxite, and oil as collateral. What's the way out of all of this?
All right. Doctor has addressed some of those critical issues. One, the global architecture need to be reworked, particularly from the financial Bretton Woods institutions that have held us so badly down. What is key is that there's nothing wrong in borrowing, but some of the conditions or conditionality that are precedent in some of those lending are questionable. And African leaders, on the other hand, must rethink their development strategy rather than relying on the West. We talked about the issues of governance earlier, corruption. But there's a politics, a geopolitics in terms of lending from the West and lending from China. Those are political consideration in terms of who give money to African countries. So if Ghana is owing money to China and IMF, it's not the owing of that money to those countries that is important. What is important, the leader themselves, this money they took from China, to what extent do they use those money to develop their infrastructures and their country? Then two, when you tie your mineral resource to lending, they equally have implication for your own development, because you have sold out your community resource to a third country that is not able to give you what you want. So the conversation here, in my view, is that these global institutions, even including China, we need to look inward and look at the loan packaging. They call them concession loans. To what extent those concessions really impact on African development. So we're saying that IMF, even if you look at two seminar books for people who partake in IMF, you have one written by Joseph Singh, who was the economic advisor to Clinton, who worked in IMF, and that most of the packages to Africa are not well intended. And that's an insider's perspective. There's another book, Economic Hitman, that address some of these fundamentals within those Bretton Woods institutions that are not good for Africa. So the leadership, particularly Ruto, should look inward. In the last administration, those money they took from those development partners, in quote, to what extent did they impact the development, particularly the road networks from Nairobi to Mombasa and to Kisii on the northern flank of that were abandoned. The ones that were taken from China, on the other hand, did not meet those infrastructural developments. So the question is, we need to look at integrity, look at governance issues, and the role of those Bretton Woods institutions, whether they are still relevant to African development in this century.
You know, this speak again to cost. If you read Lee Kuan Yew's work, From Third World to First World, one of the challenges that he had to encounter facing African leaders who were coming to Commonwealth nations to borrow money, whether the people that they were borrowing money from were entering commercial flights to the meetings, and those who were going to borrow were chartering commercial flight to come to the meeting. Okay. And they had a lot of mistresses all in the here, and then we carried them to that place and we borrowed the money and we spend it in their country and then come back empty-handed, and then we are going back again to go and beg. So this is the issue, and this is what Africans should speak to. Okay. That if we need money, it must be
for a particular project.
Purpose.
Okay.
And then, now, of course, we must see it to fruition.
Okay. Now, on that particular note of chartered flight and mistresses, we'll go on a break. Souq Pulse will be right back.
Okay.
My name is Raymond Bola Brown.
Hi, my name is Fred Amata, and you are on to Souq News.
If you are watching this channel for the first time, make sure you continue to watch it, because this is Souq News.
Shout out to Souq News. Actually, I don't know. I really enjoyed the little moment I spent with you, and I think with more of this.
Souq News. Here's the Souq News, who had the courage to transcend a locked-off camera and actually have a conversation with a human being. It's a pleasure, Souq News. Thank you.
My name is Dr. Rafiu Oladipo.
My name is Baba Jalal Repega.
I'm Reverend Juliet Benite.
I'm Godio Didi.
My name is Professor Oladokun Sulaiman Olarawaju.
Souq News is on the ground, loading.
Very enlightening, very educative, and entertaining.
Thank you to Souq News.
So I'm happy that Souq TV has come into existence.
I'm happy to be here in the Souq News.
I want to encourage you to subscribe to the channel and keep watching news that makes sense.
As Browning said, one's extension of one's reach should not exceed one's grasp, or what is heaven for. And I think Souq News is doing that.
Africa needs a voice of truth, and Souq News has become one of them. And get ready, get ready, get ready.
And keep watching.
Keep watching Souq News.
Keep watching Souq News. It's a place to be.
Keep watching.
Hello and welcome back to Souq Pulse. It's heating up in here, and we're still talking about IMF and the debt burden, Africa's debt burden. So, Mr. Sam, let me go straight to the era between the late 80s and the early 90s. At least growing up, we remember this very well, even if we never knew what it was. There was a program called SAP, Structural Adjustment Program, a policy that came through our borrowing from IMF. Strictly, was it a success? There are proponents, there are opponents. people are saying that was one of the major banes of Nigeria's suffering. Was it something that we shouldn't even have tried in the first place?
I think earlier in this conversation we have spoken to those issues. Some of those borrowing, lending from the Bretton Woods institutions to a very large extent, in my view, are not progressive to African development. We have to put that in the public domain. There's this argument, a very strong one at that, the structural adjustment program actually brought Nigeria to the level we are. Some of those conditionality that were tied to the IMF structural adjustment were killing. And I recall, as somebody who was in the first year in the university in the middle of the 80s, we had to queue for what they call essential commodities. And you spend hours. And that psychologically was defeating for a policy regime that was supposed to benefit the people, the citizen. To that extent, those borrowings were not thought out. They were imposed on us, and some schools of thought maintain that those regimes were imposed on us. And that's why we spoke earlier that there's a need to reform the architecture of some of these Bretton Woods institutions that have brought us down. And when you look at it from the development equation point of view, nothing much has been done since those institutions has been assisting Africa in terms of development. They have rather, I actually call them buccaneers.
Okay.
Drain us.
Okay. I wanted to speak.
Hold on.
Sorry, just 1 minute. Just to look at it. 1 minute. Okay. Just 1 minute. You see, the idea about SAP. SAP didn't fail because the program was bad. SAP failed because of the hypocrisy of Nigerian leaders. And I give you one very simple example. You see, it was to tighten bed. Why the ordinary citizens were tightening their bed, those who were in Aso Rock were not tightening their beds.
What about the businesses?
No, look,
businesses could not access foreign
look at it. Look at it. You see, what the program was meant to do. You see, we also need to do a comparative analysis of that program. It failed in Nigeria but succeeded elsewhere. What we currently know as Asian Tiger today are offspring of SAP, Structural Adjustment Program. So it was not just designed for Africa or Nigeria alone. But where did we actually fail? Is the fact that you remember the cushioning effect. And this happened every time in Africa. You don't plant corn today and expect to reap it tomorrow. There's always a gestation period for every program or policy. So if we are going to say, okay, we want to start to plant rice, for example, and we know that it will take 3 months for rice from the day of planting to harvesting to happen. So we can program that in the next 3 months, this is what we are going to do. And this is where the leaders, themselves in their hypocrisy, accepted the money, accepted the policies, now have to wire the money away from their program and the purpose and was supposed to serve. So SAP in itself would have been a blessing to Africa if the leaders were not hypocritical and were not just too corrupt.
Doctor, I think that speaks to the issue that you raised earlier, the issue of governance versus leadership. So if the policy regimes were actually meant to help the people and leadership fail in terms of the deliverable, then that's a big question.
It's a big question mark. Yeah.
So that's a point that we need to make.
Before we look at this question mark again, in 2020, IMF gave the Buhari administration a loan at a little above 3 billion. And the rules that came with it, the policies that came with it was knockout fuel subsidy, reduce civil service
size of the civil service
power. That was not done. Now, Tinubu came, and in the first month, he took out he knocked out fuel subsidy without IMF loan. Power, a lot of things are happening in power without IMF loan. So now, begs, do we really need this IMF loan to do the right?
You see, like Sam has alluded to earlier on, there's no nation that doesn't borrow. Every nation borrows. In short, as a matter of fact, as we speak, every country in the world, there is no exception. They've all borrowed to their neck. Every country. whether it's in Asia, whether it's in the Arab world, whether it is in the Americas or Europe. Every country has borrowed to their neck. But you see, the issue here we're dealing with is the fact that, look at it, what IMF is saying is, okay, I'm giving you 3 billion to do something. Now, out of this 3 billion, you're going to spend 2 billion on overhead. And this money is supposed to be going on a project. So if you want this project really to succeed, then you need to cut down on your excesses, which for me are overdue. Now, you look at it, you see, employment in Nigeria, for example, in public service has become a social service. And I keep advocating this everywhere I go. Employment should not be social service. And what the argument you hear from National Assembly is, oh, if we reduce people, people will be unemployed. You don't just get people into office because they have to be in the office. It's the functionality of the work that is important. Now, how do we really channel people away from being idle? Like you go into public offices, federal government parastatals, and you see people loafing. Some don't even come to work, and they are taking salary, and it is adding to the overhead and the burden of government. This is wastefulness. So you need to cut this wastefulness. But again, for political expediency, no government will want to take that. Because if you cut down, labor go on strike. If labor is not on strike, all the trade unions are on strike, people are thinking of the next election. So while we are having these political exigencies, we don't really look at the practicality of the policy that is in place. And that's why you see most of our policies are obeyed in breaches than in actuality.
All right, so I'm going to take us away again from Nigeria. I don't know.
Yeah,
Probably
I just wanted to quickly make a point.
Okay.
The government has to be disciplined in terms of reskilling its workforce.
Which of the government?
Nigerian government in particular.
African government,
yes,
really?
African government in general. So the point here is that you need to cut down the size of governance. And the only way you can do that is to reskill the workforce into other sectors, and they become useful. And other smaller countries in Africa has done that, and they are successful at that. So we cannot just be blaming the Bretton Woods institution, but the leadership and the political economy need to be sorted out so that we can move.
Okay, so I want to speak to agglomeration, talking about business, have countries having, a lot of businesses within, right? And if we look at this, I think we'll speak more of China, even dominating the tech industry, agriculture, and, and all of that. So knowing that a lot of African countries are dependent on China, I must say, I'm looking at it, what are the pros and cons?
Well, there are a lot of pros and there's a lot of cons. And I think for us is the con. The con is far away what the pro are. And I think what will be happening, at least see some boys who are in Alaba, they are selling and they are making some ends meet. So when we finish selling, we ship down the money down to China. And so the economy is robust and then we're suffering here. So that is just what it is. And I think this is where we really need to think. Yes, we are all import-dependent economy. But my latest argument recently is really that, of course, there's nothing too bad that people are importing. Because even American is buying from China. Almost 50 to 60% of products that are in America today, they are all from China. So America is also benefiting from China, such as Europe. But it's for us to be able, individually, as country in Africa, to look at areas of our strength, where we can concentrate energy and put everything within us to develop, that we are not just buying, we are also able to sell to them. And that is the only way to address the balance of payment and balance of trade deficits. Because if you are selling, then you receive some dollars. So you can actually mitigate the exchange rate issues. But if everything you do is import everything wholesale, you cannot control your macroeconomic indicators.
Don't you also think that we should encourage, encourage Nigerian products?
Yeah, but
that
was actually what Souq was meant to do. That we should focus less on importation and consume what we produce and produce what we consume.
But regrettably, during Souq and after Souq, most of the industry that were in Nigeria actually went into commodities.
Yes, they folded.
And the ones that are active are not so encouraged, meaning that everybody wants to import. You want to buy a very small item as little as perfume, you want imported. You want pen, you want imported.
Who is you?
I'm talking about Nigeria generally. Now we are bringing
but this is the issue. Now, but this is where, of course, again, you look at budgets and tax become a tool for administration. And this is what the common man in the street are not told. Because the elite benefit from this system. And because us who are the elite, we are the ones who are able to wear Turkish suits and use American-made pen, we keep advocating that government continue to subsidize this item. But if you actually want the local industry to grow, what do? You put heavy taxes on the imported.
Okay, sir.
So that it becomes a luxury product. So that only the people who has the means can buy them. So that those who have no means, they have alternative which they can buy locally. Now, this is what government did not do. So what we did, that Sam is referring to, was the fact that we were doing SAP on the one hand, and of course we opened our door, for example, to textiles coming from China. And they were coming far cheaper than what we could produce here. In terms of, yes, in terms of technology. And to that extent, all the textile factories you see in Kano, in Kaduna, in Lagos, they are folded up. Because it's easier and cheaper to buy the foreign than the local. Okay. And you can see this also happening in rice as we speak, that the local rice is more expensive than the foreign rice. And everybody, human beings, we are rational decision makers. So we want to buy something that is good and at the same time very cheap.
And that is why you see people even going for the thrift material. You call them second hand, you know. They go for it and getting new ones.
Importing a direct material from China. What an irony.
Including Ofe Nubu from India.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's, before we digress that much, between 2022 and 2023, Africa spent well over 440 billion on debt servicing alone. That amount is staggering. I know you say that is what they owe. I know you say that. Now, let me borrow a line from what you said. You said, this is like the second time you've schooled me on that, on China being able to isolate themselves. Is it possible that Africa can, as a whole, or even half of it, or even 1/10 of it can come together and say, hey, guys, listen, for the next 10 years, let's not pay nothing. Let's come together and fix ourselves. Is it possible that
not
Africa...
pay or let not borrow?
Let's not pay first.
Oh, okay.
Africa spent well over 440 billion in 1 year servicing debt. So is it possible that Africa can say, let's isolate ourselves?
It's very possible.
So what is stopping them?
You see, there are two ways to it. There are two ways to it. It's either to say, no, I won't pay at all. I can't pay.
That comes with surcharges.
So what it means is that there's nothing to subsidize. What it means is I say, I'm not going to pay at all. Then you say you can't borrow again. That's what it means. Because we're a sovereign nation. Now, the second route, which is what I'm actually advocating, is for African leaders to sit down with the IMF and World Bank and to say, we owe you so much. This debt is choking us. We will not be able to do anything substantial if we have to service this debt. What we need from you is to give us a moratorium of 10 years, a moratorium of 15 years, and give us enough space to create wealth so that we'll be able to service your debt. We don't, in these 15 years, we don't want to come back to borrow. We want to manage the little that we have so that we can create avenue to generate more wealth and then we pay you. Now, this is common between debtors and creditors to sit down and restructure your facility. That's okay, right now I don't have the means to pay. And like they say in my village, there's no prison that will take you when you tell somebody I am owing you, but I don't have money to pay now.
Not that I'm not willing to pay.
No, that, yes, I don't have money to pay now. Okay. So I think that for me is the right African
I think for me, another perspective to deal with this African issue is we need a political will and find a way to get at this colonial heritage that has held us down. Africa as a collective, we're about 1.4 billion. And if we're able to open Africa up for trade among Africans, then these issues of IMF and all these Bretton Woods institutions will become a thing of the past. So we need that Africa reform that break down the walls of Francophone, Russophone, Anglophone, whatever phone that you can have within Africa. because we have the population. And Africa is a home to natural resources that develop all the other parts of the world. So if you look at it from an economic point of view of resource endowment, then if we look inward, we're able to develop our resource and stay focused on this development paradigm, then this issue of debt burden will be a thing of the past.
Okay, we are going on another break. Souq Pulse will be right back. Hey, don't go anywhere, and thank you for staying tuned.
My name is Dr. Rafiu Oladipo.
My name is Baba Jalal Repega.
I'm Reverend Juliet Benite.
I'm Godio Didi.
My name is Professor Oladokun Sulaiman Olarawaju.
Souq News is on the ground, loading.
Very enlightening, very educative, and entertaining.
Thank you to Souq News.
So I'm happy that Souq TV has come into existence.
I'm happy to be here in the Souq News.
I want to encourage you to subscribe to the channel and keep watching news that makes sense.
As Browning said, one's extension of one's reach should not exceed one's grasp, or what is heaven for. And I think Souq News is doing that.
Africa needs a voice of truth, and Souq News has become one of them. And get ready, get ready, get ready.
And keep watching.
Keep watching Souq News.
Keep watching Souq News. It's a place to be.
Keep watching.
I'm okay.
My name is Raymond Bola Brown.
Hi, my name is Fred Amata, and you are on to Souq News.
If you are watching this channel for the first time, make sure you continue to watch it, because this is Souq News.
Shout out to Souq News. Actually, I don't know. I really enjoyed the little moment I spent with you, and I think with more of this.
Souq News. Here's the Souq News, who had the courage to transcend a locked off camera and actually have a conversation with a human being. It's a pleasure, Souq News. Thank you very much.
Yes, welcome back to Souq Pulse. You've been with us and it's been very intriguing and engaging. We are still here talking IMF and African debt burden. Before we went on the break, our wise ones put us on hold and they made sure that, yes, we learned something nice. So let's go back to the analogy you gave about the microfinance bank. Now, between 2022 and 2024 December, every African nation that had a loan, a pending loan, there was an increase in interest rate by 5%. Now I'm asking, was there no agreement before that loan was given? They are saying based on different economic terms that things that happen, dollar inflation, inflation there, and the loan interest increased by 5%. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course, those things are wired and written into the agreement, and you know, of course, these are deposited funds. It's not, it's not free money that is borrowed from somewhere. You see, money loses value by the day. So if you have 20,000, gave somebody 20,000 last year, January, and the person is to pay you back that 20,000 today, the value of that 20,000 will be less than 16,000 naira at today. Who will take the burden of the extra? You see, he who goes to equity must go with a clean hand. And I think that is the point that we must emphasize as Africans. I have gotten to that point in my own life to see, look, we should stop putting blame, like Sam has said, on these institutions alone. We must also look inward to look at it. What are the conditions precedent to our inability to service this debt? And this is where the focus really should be, and it should affect our lifestyle. And this is the issue that Lee Kuan Yew raised about African leaders and their participation in the Commonwealth, that we're playing to a different rule completely. Now, if you want to pay debt, the world is moving toward a knowledge-driven economy. And we are still taking manufacturing, cutlass and whole farming. These are not going to add value. So this is the real issue. So if you borrow and you pay on time, you will not be subject to pay the addition in terms of interest that are accumulated or rates that are rising above what you have borrowed. So this is the problem. Africa should borrow for specific reasons. And those reasons should be clear. And then, of course, they themselves should want to censor themselves, not the borrower, because the truth of the matter is that any man who is borrowing you money is on a commercial business.
And they want you to keep coming.
Yes. So, because if your borrower, your lender is always fasting and praying so that borrower will not die.
You will come and borrow again.
Because if a borrower dies, of course you lose your money. So you have to pray so that they can be alive.
Okay.
Let's go to Mr. Souq.
Strongly in line with what Dr. just said. More often than not, when the African leaders go into this meeting for borrowing, they are always in a hurry because they need those money for other external reasons beyond what those monies are borrowed for. More often than not, they don't even look at the condition precedent on those loans. So they just get by and they just sign them into law. So when they have issues and they are drawing them back into some of those conditions, precedents draw down on those loans, they begin to look at it, okay.
So this was in?
Because those things are already factored in, but because they are in a hurry to just get those money for their personal interest, they don't even look at those conditions precedent. And this is very critical for leaders who goes into these institutions to negotiate some of these concession loan in quote.
Yeah, but the same issue raised is just to let you understand that sometimes Sam has said that, and he's just be mild about using the language. You see, you want to marry a new wife, you have promised the woman that, look, well, I'm going to buy a house for you in Asokoro, and the only way that money is going to come is if we borrow more loan. So whether the terms are favorable or not, it's not as if we don't have people who can read books. We are not in a hurry. We deliberately sign them off because of what we are going to get. Take, for example, the lady that was eventually caught with to have masterminded the P&ID case that would have cost Nigeria $11 billion US, only took 100 million naira for it. And sold out the entire nation. So this is the issue.
100 million naira.
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course, when they know that directly they are not the one paying, after all, it's the country's borrowing. It's the country that is borrowing. I want to bring this before I ask the question I want to ask. You mentioned earlier about advanced country also borrowing. Yeah, so I did a bit of research again, and Japan remains, like been floating for 2 decades now, over 100%, GDP, debt to GDP, I mean to say, over 225% for over 2 decades. And yet they are thriving. The country is still doing well. If you ask me, we have Greece, 168%. We have Singapore, 168%. All of them, yet you see this country is still doing well. Now, I want to bring it down to Nigeria. Our debt to GDP ratio, the way it stands now, does it affect policy making?
Yeah, but you see, the issue you have to also understand is that you don't take this data in isolation. You also need to weigh the debt to revenue ratio for this country. Because they have capital investment that is bringing in a lot of revenue. So the debt to revenue ratio is very small compared to us that has a debt to revenue ratio of about 98%. So when the debt to GDP ratio is 23 or 24%, it looks small. But when you look at it vis-a-vis debt to revenue ratio, you see that we are endangered. We are vulnerable, we are exposed, not like them. So you see Japan revenue is coming in. So that's what you are going to look at. It's not the debt profile just, but you have to do it comparatively with what is internally generated and how much money they are making from the outside that is helping to cushion the effect of this debt on the country.
Okay, 1 hour is not enough for us to really to just divide and trash talks on Souq polls. But now we are concluding on this, and I'm still quoting the president of Kenya and also the president of South Africa, and they said this almost in tears, that when Africa borrows and pays interest of 8 times what the West borrows, and it's sad. They didn't give specifics, but they just refused. But that is very sad. Now I am going to look at this more like a policy statement. If you were to advise African heads of state, what will you tell them?
Okay, at the point of borrowing, what did you actually do with the money? If you do the right thing at the right time, those interest elements will not rise to that level. So they need to look inward to be more disciplined and find a way to reduce corruption, which is the bane of African development. So it's not just about going into summit diplomacy and they are shouting, Africa, interests are rising. At the point when you took those loans, did you commit them to infrastructure for development? And where they are tied to certain elements within the country that will bring revenue, did you actually do those projects? To what percentage of that money was really used for the actual project? These are the conversations that we must sustain.
Yeah, but to just add to what Sam has said is just to also know that the level of risk inherent in a particular facility will determine what rate you charge. If I'm going to borrow money to Grace and I know that he has a capacity to pay me back, I can decide to say, well, I'm borrowing to you at 1 digit. But if I'm borrowing to you and I know that the capacity to pay back is not so sure, I will give you 2 digits. And this is what is happening. So most of the Western country has capacity to pay back, and Africa had no capacity. So the risk is higher. And therefore you have to take some of your money from the interest. And I think this is what it is.
So what's your final thought on this?
My final thought is that Africa must be strategic in terms of borrowing, and we should not borrow to consume, we must borrow for production. And that is the way to go.
So you have heard it. Do not borrow for consumption. Borrow for
production.
That's
the way to go.
That is really, really the way to go. It's been nice having you on Souq Polls today, and we are grateful. Remember, always log on every day, Monday to Friday. We'll be here 4 p.m. Souq Spot. We're still looking forward to having you tomorrow, and thank you very much for being there. Grace?
Yes, I think they've all said it all. We've had our own parts in this. That line I want to take is that be strategic while you think of borrowing. Of course, until tomorrow again, we'll see you on Souq Polls. My name is Grace Komalafe. See you there.